Good evening and welcome to the Lakeville City Council meeting. It is June 1st and 6:30 p.m. I'll call our meeting to order. I'm going to take a special point of personal privilege right now just to make a few comments from my heart. And we've been through a lot this last week and actually for the last couple months. We remain in uncharted territory. We spent 2 months responding to an invisible enemy, the COVID virus. It has been a confusing time. Each day, it seems, we learn something new from public health or CDC or whoever. I want to thank you, all of us in Lakeville, and encourage you to continue to take individual responsibility as to your health. Today, restaurants took a small step forward with outdoor dining. Hairstylists and others are opening as well, and we'll begin to move in farther and farther to have things open up, I hope. Unfortunately, on top of this uncertainty, a week ago was the tragic and unjust death of George Floyd. And now we experience the unrest of the tragedy. Peaceful, heartfelt conversations and protests, and the worst of humanity evidenced in looting, riots, and arson in the very communities that are most impacted. Along with this, I am so grateful for how our community has responded and the evidence of our love for our neighbor by checking in with your family and friends, helping in the cleanup of businesses and streets, food and clothing donations, and other types of support for those that have been impacted. As I have shared before, I want to assure you as to my confidence in our city leadership and our public safety teams, led by Chief Long and Chief Meyer. I'm so grateful for all their work in support of our city and support of our lives, safety, and healthfulness. And lastly, what I think we all know is that we live life through our context and life experiences. The color of our skin, our families, our activities, and our communities. This week has reminded us that racism is an issue. While we have done many things here in Lakeville in our schools and in our city, I know there is much to do as we go forward. Let's now move into our moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand if you're able. Now we'll go to our city clerk for our roll call.
Volk.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here.
Anderson.
Here.
Hellier.
Here.
Lee.
Here. Thank you very much. Item 3 on our agenda is an opportunity for citizen comments. I should have said this at the start as well. I know we may have some people online listening in, but we do have an opportunity to hear from you. We allow up to 3 minutes for a citizen comment on any topic that you would like, whether it's a comment you'd like to make publicly or a question for us as city council or staff. At this time, is there anyone in the audience or anyone online that would like to make a citizen comment? And if there is, I'll ask you to raise your hand or alert us to the fact that you'd like to make a comment. And when you come up to the podium or begin your comment, please state your name and address for the record. Is there anyone that has a citizen comment tonight? Mr. Miller, is anyone online?
Looks like there are some names, but if they want to, they can unmute themselves and talk at this time.
Okay, thank you. We'll just give them a minute. Okay, we're not hearing from anyone, so we will move on with our agenda, and I will go back to you, Mr. Miller, if there's any additional information on our agenda tonight.
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Thank you. Our presentation this evening is from our police department, and we do have with us Chief Jeff Long to share with us the quarterly report. Welcome, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This quarterly report will actually cover the first 4 months of the year. It's been a while since I've used this, so give me a minute to make sure that I'm doing it correct. That's not correct. There we go. The first 4 months of the year, we started the year out with something called Cops and Coats, which is a campaign to find new and gently used coats for the 360 Communities Lewis House. Went well. We held a Trial Citizens Academy in which we had a select audience of Rotarians, school district employees, and the Lakeville Public Safety Foundation members. We hope to hold another in 2021. The first one was a great success. We had great feedback, and we look forward to holding those in the future. Our partnership with ISD 194 saw 2 good news items. SROs at the second half of the year were handing out coffee gift cards to students who were found doing the right things for the right reasons. Oftentimes, people have contact with the police department only in a negative circumstance. We wanted to make sure we're having contact with people in a positive circumstance. And finally, we've added a 3rd SRO to work in the middle schools next year, and we look forward to that partnership. Detective Todd Williams completed his 2-year rotation in the investigative divisions. He was involved in many important investigations over the last 2 years. We wish him well as he returns to patrol. The second face there is Detective Brad Woobid, who just began his 2-year rotation in investigations. There's a certain segment of our population that may have seen him while he was conducting traffic enforcement over the last 3 years. In fact, there should be about 6,000 people that recognize him from the last couple of years. Our seasonal CSOs have started, and they're back monitoring the parks, the boat launches, city trails, and as well as educating people on social distancing. The last few months, our training has obviously dwindled and declined significantly because of the pandemic, but we are required by law over a certain period of time to renew our certification to operate the DMT, which is our evidentiary breath test machine. We have 15 officers we've put through that. We've added 2 crime scene unit members and sent them to an advanced crime scene investigations course. And we've sent investigators to interview and interrogation courses, as well as standardized field sobriety testing courses. Standardized field sobriety testing is that before a PBT or preliminary breath test is given, we do a standardized testing process, which is the same whether you're stopped in Duluth or whether you're stopped in Lakeville. Our calls for service in January through April, surprisingly enough, are not down, or are down. Going over a few categories that we've talked about with mental health, with things slowing down, the suicide threat or attempts and the welfare checks have slowed. Welfare checks is when someone's just concerned about somebody and they call and say, will you please go check on them? And we always encourage people to call. If you have any concerns about anybody, that's what we're here to do, so please do call 911. This one is a little bit different. Despite everything slowing down, this is the one category that hasn't. So we continue to focus on this, and we will continue to focus on this. And again, we also encourage people to call 911 if they or a member of their household is in crisis. Traffic stops, again, down significantly. The accidents are down, which would be consistent with less traffic. You will see that most of our Part 1 and Part 2 crimes are down. The only one that really has caught my eye is the DWIs. Despite everything slowing down, the DWIs really have not. I think that's an indicator of the stress that's going on in our world today. We had eventually asked our officers not to make any traffic stops unless there was something egregious, and as you can see, there was obviously enough people driving under the influence that it caught their attention. So total calls for service, just comparing ours to Egan and Apple Valleys for the same time period. You'll see that each city is down just a little bit on total calls. This just compares the number of calls that each of these communities has received. One thing that is interesting to me as the Lakeville police chief is despite essentially doing no traffic, our call numbers are still bumping up slightly ahead of Burnsville. Calls aren't necessarily the same, but it is a statistic that caught my eye. I just wanted to end this by covering what's happening during the current events. I want to assure the council and the community that Lakeville is our priority. We have focused on keeping our own city safe. If there are any behaviors that need attention in Dakota County, that's our second priority. And then we will move on to outside of our county if help is requested. We have set up a county emergency operations center that is in close contact with the multi-agency command center downtown. We have combined resources with each police department in the county so that we can have what's called a quick response team or mobile field force, which can address hotspots throughout the county. Lakeville has been very quiet. I'm very thankful for that. There have been incidents throughout our county that have required additional staffing. We continue to collect what we call intel or intelligence that shows where people are going and what we can expect. And the conclusion of the event that's occurring, we hope, as the mayor has discussed, to move forward in a positive fashion with good conversations and moving forward together. On that with our mission statement, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chief, very much. Council, any comments, questions? Volk.
Chief Long, I just want to pass it on to our officers, how grateful I am that you folks kept us safe this weekend. It was a little tough after COVID to know that suddenly we're going on to a curfew next. So my husband and I called them curfew dinners, date nights. And he was thrilled to know it was going to get extended one more night last night. So, but I think the important part is when I was talking to citizens is how important it was for all of us to follow that curfew so that you could concentrate on keeping our businesses and our community safe. And so, you know, I caught people out there right at 8 o'clock as everybody was getting home or whatever, but the citizens did a really good job of adhering to curfew. I'm thankful, but I'm really thankful for everything you guys did for us, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I would agree the community did a great job, and I'm very appreciative.
I think we could say that comment on all our behalves, that we appreciate everything that's going on and including your leadership and the rest of your team.
Thank you.
And grateful that you folks are here for us.
Thank you.
Every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
We'll now move on to item number 6, which is the consent agenda. These are matters we consider to be more routine in the life of the city, business matters of the city. Mr. Miller, is there anything you'd like to highlight for us this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. It's a brief consent agenda tonight. Only one item to highlight, item 6C. That's the ALF Ambulance Board 2021 budget. ALF stands for Apple Valley, Lakeville, Farmington. The three cities have partnered to provide ambulance service for many years. This is a pretty routine budget. There's really no new revenue or expenses coming out, but it's just a formality. The ALF Board, which is made up of representatives of each city, is recommending approval.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience or council, any questions, comments on anything on the consent agenda? And it is fairly short. So, hearing no comments or questions, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? And I believe I need to do this with a roll call vote. Do I? I would recommend it. Okay. Yeah, okay, that would be fine. So, Shar, roll call, please.
Volk.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Hellier.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Thank you. We have approved the consent agenda, and we'll move on to item number 7. Preliminary plat proposal on the Preserve is the name of the development, and I believe, is Jeremy Lobo here, or there he is? Please come to the podium and share a little bit about the application and development.
Sure. Thanks. Good evening, Mayor, City Staff, and Council members. I'm Jeremy LeBeau with Progressive LLC. My team and I are here tonight to discuss the Preserve development. It's an 82-acre community in the heart of Lakeville that we're proposing. Over the last year and a half, we have spent time planning and collaborating with the city staff to mindfully plan this community. Many hours were spent to save the natural areas of this development of the property, we carved out about 37 acres. That would include wetlands, play areas, trails, and saving 41% of the trees that are in the neighborhood, so on the property. In addition to saving some of those critical natural features of the development, we've also believed that this development is critical for the city of Lakeville for infrastructure. We have a connection that 190th is going to come through and connect to County Road 50. And we're also completing a trail connection from Shady Oak on the Greenway. So that'll come north and it'll connect over to, from the north, and then we'll come south through the property. This development will be upper bracket homes starting at around $550,000 with Country Joe Homes as the preferred builder. And that's the preserve. So we do have one thing that we need to address from an engineering memorandum from May 13th on page 3, paragraph 2, where we're talking about the timeline of the connection from 190th Street to County Road 50, where we'd like to get a little extra time with that. So I don't know if Daryl can jump in and talk a little bit about that, but that's just one thing that we wanted to bring up, so.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions for Mr. LeBeau at this time? Joshua?
Could you talk a little bit more about the connection of Iteri, and, well, I should say the lack of connection from Iteri to, is that 196th Street? And it looks like a cul-de-sac, but there's nothing being developed there, and there's no connection to the thoroughfare there. Are there engineering difficulties in that area?
Yeah, so we had, upon purchasing the property, we did some test pits and we did find some contaminants in that area. Oh, so we are working with Wink and Associate, and I believe Michelle from Wink is on the call tonight with us. So part of the reason why we turned that into a cul-de-sac is because we just didn't want to disturb those soils there. Gotcha. So that's part of that's the main reason why that kind of is that cul-de-sac with no houses on there, so.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a permanent decision?
Yes, yep.
Any other questions at this time? Otherwise, we'll go to the staff report. Thank you, just hang tight. We'll have, I guess, Mr. Morey doing the staff report. We may have some further questions later on.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm going to try the remote and see how that works. Yes. The preserve, as you heard from Mr. LeBeau, is preliminary plat of 89 single-family lots, and there is 5 outlots, and it's on 82 acres, and it's basically those 2 large vacant squares in the middle of the screen on this aerial photo. Kenwood Trail or County Road 50 is just to the west, that runs diagonally through the southwest corner of that aerial photo, and 185th Street is just to the north. You cannot quite see it on the aerial photo, but it's to the north of this proposed development. In conjunction with the preliminary plat, there is 2 other applications. One is for a rezoning of the property from RS2, which is a single-family designation, to RS3, also single-family residential. As you can see on the screen, the area that's crosshatched is the area of the preliminary plat, and you see that the developments that have occurred adjacent to this over the years on the west, east, and south sides are all also zoned RS3. At one time, these properties in this area were all zoned RS2, but over the course of the years and the development that has occurred, they've been rezoned to RS3. So rezoning the preserve to RS3 is consistent with the previous developments that have occurred and will be compatible with the residential neighborhoods on the other sides of them. And then the third application associated with this development is a variance, and that is for 3 buffer yard lots, and it's a lot width variance. The variance is approximately 10 or 11 feet. 110-foot lot width is required for side yard buffer lots adjacent to 190th Street, and there's 3 lots that will be just below that. And the reason for the variance request is again, as you heard Mr. LeBeau state earlier, they had significant challenges with the environment and the topography and the wetlands in this area. And to be able to preserve those as much as possible and to be able to connect 190th Street to Kenwood Trail resulted in 3 lots needing a slight variance from the lot width standard, again, for the buffer yards. Here's the preliminary plat, and again, it includes 5 outlots. As you can see on the preliminary plat, there is a large areas of wetlands within this subject property, and the developer has taken painstaking measures to try to avoid those wetlands to the greatest extent possible. There's also a couple of areas where there'll be greenway corridor trail connections through the outlots, basically connecting to the existing greenway corridor trail in Spring Hill, which is kind of at the northeast corner of this preliminary plat, and then also the greenway corridor that's existing in the greenway plat to the south, and that's south of 190th Street. These outlots will all be deeded to the city with the various phases of the final plats. And as you heard from the developer, that totals about 37 of the 82 acres is set aside for deeding in these outlots to be deeded to the city. The plat also, as mentioned, includes the extension of 190th Street, which exists on the very east border of the preliminary plat. That will be extended through the plat and connect with Kenwood Trail. There's already a street intersection that is in place for that connection. 190th is a major collector, has been on the city's transportation plan as a major collector for a number of years, so this will complete that segment of that major collector street as part of our transportation plan. And also there is extensions of several local streets from those adjacent neighborhoods. Again, all those streets were planned for interconnectivity to connect the neighborhoods, and they're being extended and connected into the preserved preliminary plat from those adjoining residential neighborhoods. Again, as you heard from Mr. LeBeau, as part of the due diligence for this development, the developer did run into some areas with some buried debris, construction, and household waste. They've done quite an extensive investigation to get an idea of all the waste and soil contamination that has occurred out there. There has been no contamination of the water system, so that's a good thing. They have WENC is preparing what they call a response action plan, and they're going to submit that to the Minnesota PCA, Pollution Control Agency. And one of the stipulations for this preliminary plat that staff is recommending is that response action plan would be complied with, consistent with what is approved by the PCA. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on the 3 applications, preliminary plat, rezoning, and variance at their May 21st meeting, and unanimously recommended approval, subject to 11 stipulations. There was no public comment. However, staff was made aware that there was some technical difficulties with residents being able to access the meeting via Chime. We did receive 4 emails related to this development. They were included in your packet materials, and as you can see, Mr. Dempsey, the associate planner who prepared the report for the preserve, did respond to those questions that were and comments that were raised in the emails, and those questions and comments were also addressed by the Planning Commission at the public hearing. The Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Committee unanimously recommended approval of the preliminary plat at their May 20th meeting. And I should point out that park dedication for the preserve will be a combination of land, which will be for the Greenway corridor trails, and also cash. So in summary, staff is recommending approval of the preserve preliminary plat, an ordinance rezoning the property from RS2 to RS3, a lot width variance for 3 buffer yard lots, and adoption of the findings of fact. And I can stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maury. Council comments, questions at this time? Any comments or questions? I think it might be helpful, could you, I don't want to go into great detail, but could you just, because we did have the meeting issue with Chime and stuff, could you just briefly describe the types of comments that came in and maybe also refer to the matter that Mr. LeBeau brought up as far as the connection?
Yeah, most of the questions, in paraphrasing, were related to the extension and connection of 190th Street to the residential streets in their neighborhood. There's concerns about cut-through traffic. There was concerns about speed limit and these types of things. Also brought up by the neighborhood was the perception that these lots in the preserve would be smaller than the lots in their neighborhoods, which, as you could see from the zoning, the zoning that's proposed, the RS3 is consistent with the zoning of their neighborhood, so the lots will be substantially the same size. And there was a little bit of concern raised, again, about just the unknown with the soil contamination, and again, the contamination is being addressed through this response action plan by the engineer that the developers hired to address that issue. I think that was the majority of the concerns. How house price points came up, that's again not an issue for the Planning Commission to address, but you heard Mr. LeBeau mention that as part of his presentation as well. I think I've covered the majority or generally the questions that were raised.
Okay. Could you just address this question regarding the connection?
Yeah, the connection of 190th to County Road 50 was listed in the engineering report, and the response from engineering was that it be done either with Phase 2 or prior to the end of November of 2021. The reason that was brought up and put in the engineering report again was because this 190th is a major collector. It's important street connection for the city to get that connection done sooner rather than later. There is an opportunity between now and with the final plat, because that's not listed as a stipulation in the preliminary plat resolution, but when the developer comes in with their phase 1 final plat, we can revisit that issue, because at that time the timing for 190th Street would be put into the development contract and then would be part of the formal final plat approval. So we certainly can revisit that between now and final plat, but that was the reason why it was put in the engineering report.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? There was, maybe I already mentioned this and I missed it, but I thought we also received, I received a copy of a letter that came in terms of a utility connection.
Yes.
And could you address that as well? I don't know if some council members had a conversation with that individual. I unfortunately apologize to them that I didn't respond to their letter till about an hour ago. But if you could please just address that. I think I understand what's going on, but if you could please address it.
Yeah, this is from a property owner that is just to the north. I believe they own a couple of 10-acre lots just to the north. Those lots front 185th Street, but then also back up to the north boundary of the preserve plat, and they're requesting that the Phase 3 connection, and you got to help me with the street name. Exonia, thank you very much. The connection of Exonia, which basically runs north-south right through the middle of this preliminary plat. They're requesting that Phase 3 extension of Exonia to their property occur sooner, so that they're able to develop their property sooner, because that'll bring sewer and water to their property. The city has no purview in our subdivision ordinance to require a developer to do phasing differently than what they're proposing, unless there is a need in terms of public safety or public street connections or these types of things. But as you can see from the preliminary plat, there's a number of local street connections that are being made. So in other words, there's going to be many ways for the residents of the preserve to get into and out of their subdivision leading up to the Phase 3 development, which is basically the very northerly portion in the central part of the preliminary plat that includes that cul-de-sac. So that was the response. We had responded to that property owner with those comments, and they followed up with, it sounds like, with the mayor and city council as well.
Okay, well, I just think it's helpful to have in our record your comments about that and the clarification. Certainly, there's nothing that precludes willing parties to negotiate something differently, but in terms of our ordinances, we don't have the support to be pushing that forward. So, comments, questions? Lee?
I only saw 2 phases listed. Is there another document with the 3rd phase?
There actually is, there was a revised phasing plan. I didn't get quite that far. Thank you. There we go.
Oh, there it is.
That included 3 phases. This is the correct phasing plan. And as you can see, Phase 3, which is up in the north central portion of the development, and includes that extension of Exonia to the north boundary, which will also include the extension of sanitary sewer and water to that boundary.
Gotcha.
Is that gravel road?
On the other side of
On the
185th
north
Street?
side of-
Yes.
Oh.
So, which brings me to my last question, just a curiosity question. So if the gravel road to the north of 185th Street, I believe there's 2 gravel roads up there? If they would desire to be connected, would that service come through this development, or would that come from a different direction?
I'm going to have to leave that one to an engineer.
Okay.
because
I can ask another time.
My
It was a-
engineering hat's really small, so.
It was just a curiosity question, so no big deal. Council, any other comments? Otherwise, I think we have the information we need. Would there be a motion?
Oh, I just.
Oh, I should go. Thank you very much for reminding me. Is there anyone in the audience or online that would like to comment on this matter? Okay, I am not hearing anyone, so now we will move on. Thank you for the reminder, Councilmember Hellier.
Mayor?
Yes.
Move to approve, 1, a resolution approving the preliminary plat of the preserve, 2, an ordinance rezoning property from RS2 to RS3 and adopt the findings of fact, and 3, a buffer yard lot with variance and adopt the findings of fact.
Second.
There is a second. I am hearing some audio, so if somebody would please mute themselves if you're listening in, or if you have something to say, speak up a little farther. Okay, with that, council, there is a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Shar, roll call, please.
Wheeler.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Hellier.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Volk.
Aye.
Thank you very much for your continued investment in the city of Lakeville. It looks like an exciting project. Thanks. We will move on to item number 8, which is an ordinance amending titles 4, 10, and 11 of the city code and summary for publication. And presenting this will be Mr. Licht, our consultant.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. It's good to be here tonight for a meeting for the first time in about 2 months. We are bringing this item forward as the last element of the comprehensive plan update started in 2017, as required by state statute to update every 10 years. First, the process is to update the comprehensive plan, and then the next step, of course, is to update the city's development regulations to implement that comprehensive plan. So we have changes to Section 4 of the city code as well as the subdivision ordinance and zoning ordinance. As part of this process, we looked not only at the zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance relative to the comprehensive plan, but city staff and myself went page by page through the document to review and identify any sections that were in need of updating. The main thrust of the update, of course, as you're familiar with, was the inclusion of zoning districts to implement the corridor mixed-use development along I-35 and the Cedar Avenue corridor to provide for development appropriate for future transit service to the city along those roadways. And then also we're looking at standards for residential development, those allowed uses by each zoning district, changes to unit and design construction for specifically townhouses. There were some standards adopted in 2000 as part of the zoning ordinance update that were no longer applicable to development and made it somewhat difficult for builders to change their unit types in response to market conditions. Related to that, prior to the public hearing by the Planning Commission, Pulte Homes had submitted a request asking the city to consider removal of the area requirements for attached garages for townhouses. The Planning Commission discussed that at their public hearing and did not recommend changes to the zoning ordinance and seek to maintain those requirements. Then the additional changes to address the affordability elements of the comprehensive plan, both relative to existing zoning districts as well as the new mixed-use developments. Other sections that were updated include expanded provisions related to sustainable development, solar, provisions related to electric vehicles, and then expansion of community gardens. In terms of economic development uses, making expansion for signage related to industrial businesses, reflecting the type of industrial development currently occurring along County Road 70 and the scale of that development, making sure that those businesses have opportunity to identify themselves. Concurrent with the comprehensive plan update was an update to the downtown development guide for downtown Lakeville. So there were provisions included as part of the zoning ordinance update to implement that document as well as the comprehensive plan. And then finally, under statute, the city's zoning map must be consistent with the future land use plan element of the comprehensive plan. So city staff undertook a detailed parcel by parcel update of that as well, which is for your consideration tonight. The process that brought this document to you this evening for consideration began in July last year with a bus tour of communities around the Twin Cities to look at examples of mixed-use developments, kind of gain ideas and start discussion with the Planning Commission and City Council as to what this form of development would look like in Lakeville for those areas guided by the comprehensive plan. And then there have been just more than a half dozen work sessions, both by the Planning Commission and City Council, to review and discuss proposed amendments to these documents. As I said, the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing to consider the amendments before you, which was held on May 22nd. Give a brief summary, kind of again, the main thrust of the update effort was the inclusion of 3 new zoning districts as part of the city's development regulations. The first being the mixed-use corridor district, applicable to the I-35 corridor. This was something that was recommended by the EDC starting in 2016 to look at the ability to incorporate multiple family housing development as part of commercial development. It really kind of started with the idea of the Amazon effect, and now what we're probably going to be seeing is the COVID effect, where the need for office space is reduced, retail environments are changed, and moving forward as to greater work-at-home opportunities or online sales. So putting this in place now to provide greater opportunity for land uses within those areas is certainly advantageous as implementing our comprehensive plan policies that were set forth starting last year. The inclusion of the residential development is by conditional use permit, allowing multiple family dwellings at a maximum density of 26 units per acre. That's consistent with example developments the city considered at County Road 46, as well as in the PUD districts at Avon Lee and Spirit of Branchton Farm. Recognizing that within the I-35 corridor, it's a much more developed area and has an established character. One of the concerns the Planning Commission and City Council both had was that these developments would fit well within that existing environment. So there are provisions requiring additional setbacks from established residential areas, as well as floor area ratios to maintain green space within these developments. Another item that was specifically discussed was the need to maintain lower profile building heights, so not more than 4 stories. In reviewing the application for the public hearing at the Planning Commission, there was the comment submitted by Summit Management, which you have as part of your packet. They're the owner-operators of the Connolly Mobile Home Park, which is to be zoned M1 district. Their concern was that the density be increased to facilitate greater development opportunity and also provide greater building height to facilitate that same concern. Planning Commission's response was that the density is established by the comprehensive plan. The maximum allowed is the 26 units per acre provided by the zoning ordinance. The building height, as well as the separation provisions in the green space, was specifically put in place by the Planning Commission and City Council to address compatibility concerns for these land uses adjacent to established residential areas. Notwithstanding that, if there is a development application that were to come forward for Connolly in the future that doesn't quite fit the box that we've drawn for the M1 district, there is always the opportunity for the property owner to request a planned unit development. So there are options still available to the property owner moving forward. The M2 is the mixed-use district that would apply to the Cedar corridor. This is more of a clean slate given the cornfields that currently exist on both sides of the roadway corridor in the absence of the transit development being available. This is essentially more of a hybrid zoning district where we're allowing commercial uses by right, but taking out some of the more auto-oriented uses, for example, convenience gas, but maintaining basically a full range of services for residents and employees within the area. The intent here is to provide a mix, again, with residential uses allowed by conditional use permit at 26 units per acre. The setbacks are much different along the local interior streets for these developments. They would be much more closer to the street, 30-foot setback, except where you're along a major road where we would establish a 30-foot setback for some additional separation and landscaping. The model for this zoning district would essentially be the Springs at Lakeville development, which is currently under construction at Cedar and Dodd, and model these requirements. The third zoning district is the RM3 medium density residential district. One element that was kind of missing from the existing range of townhouse zoning districts was something that would allow slightly higher density, more urban footprint, something similar to what's been evidenced in Spirit of Branchdon Farm that would compatibly exist with this proposed M2 zoning district as it steps away from specifically the 195th and Cedar Avenue intersection, so that it's a transitional district back to more of the traditional forms of development in Lakeville. The standards are basically the same. The density is slightly higher at one dwelling unit per 3,800 square feet, whereas the other zoning districts require 5,000 square feet. There is some additional flexibility in the unit type, and some of the design standards are lessened in terms of garage area, et cetera, recognizing that these are located next to transit locations and would be less auto-dependent than other uses. As I said, the zoning map has been updated. Certainly won't go into detail on this, but the overall changes include amending the overlay district for rural agricultural uses, which hold development outside of the MUSA at rural type uses until utilities and infrastructure are available. We've added the 3 zoning districts that I've referenced. There have been some expiration in agriculture preserve program properties. Those have been removed from that district and designated for their planned urban uses. And overall, again, this is revised consistent with the land use plan adopted as part of the 2040 comprehensive plan. Just highlighting the M1 and M2 zoning districts. Here you have the Cedar corridor for the M2 district at 179th Street, that southeast corner owned by Devney, with R3 district, or excuse me, RM2 district to the east of that. So this was prior to the comprehensive plan update guided entirely for commercial land uses. But if you look at the land use pattern in Crossroads to the north, this will provide, again, a transition with the park and ride facility that exists just to the south of it, as well as the multiple family development at Avon Lee, also to the south of what's planned for the mixed use district. Further south on the Cedar corridor, you have the 160 acres designated as M2 zoning district. We're centered on a future transit station along Cedar Avenue, transitioning out again to the RM3 districts. Along the I-35 corridor, the designation of the M1 district is much more scattered on sites north and south of the MnDOT facility, Connolly Mobile Home Park there in the center. Then the site that was part of the discussions in developing the M1 district, the Fleet Farm site, just to the south of the retail store. The other parcel I would highlight would be the triangle piece just north of Timbercrest at Lakeville that was planned as part of the comprehensive plan for medium to high density uses. It's proposed to be zoned RM3 district, and city staff is working with a developer on a potential development application that would come forward. Again, the Planning Commission held their public hearing. There were comments from the Pulte Group and Summit Management. There were additional comments submitted in email form supporting Pulte Homes' request. I believe those are in your packet. After closing the public hearing, the Planning Commission had no additional comments and voted unanimously to recommend the proposed ordinance amendments as presented. As I said, these ordinance amendments are necessary to implement the 2040 comprehensive plan. City staff is recommending approval of the clean ordinance as presented, as well as publication in summary format. And both Mr. Maury and I are available for questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Council, comments, questions? There's a lot of material here. It's a culmination of a couple of years' worth of work. So comments, questions?
I'll just comment. Thank you, Mayor. I'll just comment to say that I appreciated the process of this and how, I mean, like the mayor said, this has been several years in the making, but everything from the bus tour to the incremental conversations over time at work sessions, and I feel very comfortable with the changes and the roadmap going forward with this, and I appreciate that you addressed the concerns that have come in via email. And it sounds like there are still options available to potential developments if they bring those forward in the future. So thanks for all your work on this.
Okay. I have just two quick comments, just diving way into the detail. We had a conversation, I don't know when it was, and talked about how far in a dumpster needed to be on a driveway, and I appreciate the change here, so it's 10 feet back, not, I think it originally was 25 feet or something. Correct. So I appreciate that change. I think that's much more doable and reasonable. And I just want to confirm that the changes in here regarding fencing have no impact on the other ordinances we have around fencing around lakeside areas.
That's correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Is there any other questions? Okay. We will go to the audience. If there are any comments, questions, we handle this just like citizen comments. Is there anyone in the audience or anyone online that would like to comment regarding this matter? Hearing no one.
Will somebody raise their hand?
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see you. Oh, that's all right. Please come forward. Yeah. Please state your name and address at the start of your comment.
Sure, Steve Devney, over Farmington.
Can you give us your specific address?
5810, 212th Street West.
Thank you.
Yep. I guess, yeah, you guys have done a great job working through that. You know, it's been a process for ever, and then it starts over again, it seems like. But kind of working with Pulte here, you know, trying to reduce those garage sizes maybe just a little bit for, I wish I could go back to your slides, for on the 179th piece for the east side.
I don't know if Jim, could you go back to the slide that?
Is that easy or not?
Then we'll see.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yep,
That's it. That's it.
Can I use the mouse, or does it work? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Should.
Okay, for this piece, since it's so close to the park and ride, you know, it seems like it just makes sense for those people to be able to, you know, possibly get by with a little less of a garage, because you can hopefully get by with, you know, going with one car for the family instead of two. But I guess that would be
Okay.
my main comment.
Okay. Thank you for your comment.
Yep, thanks.
Maybe Mr. Licht or Mr. Maury, if you'd just like to comment a little more on the thinking, and if in fact we would find ourselves in a situation as that developer would come forward, if we pass this tonight, what would be their tools, what would be available to them in terms of making their argument again, in terms of some adjustments?
Mayor, there certainly would be some potential to relook at this parcel. As city staff was working on the zoning map update for this property, we recommended it be zoned to RM2 district, basically consistent with what is on the north side of 179th Street, looking kind of that makes a transition then going further east along 179th to that consistent character with a buffer yard. Mm-hmm. Depending on how the property were to develop, it would be possible to consider rezoning that piece to RM3 district, which would provide some additional flexibility in terms of garage size or design standards to fit a more urban pattern, given its proximity to the park and ride facility. So I think this would be an example of when there's a development application presented, you can better decide which box it would fit into in terms of its desired development character going forward.
Okay, thank you. Would it not also be true that if they did a planned unit development there, I mean, I think on Avonlea, we had, I hope I'm right on this, we had some garages that we made a slight adjustment to?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, Volk.
So can I just a follow-up question? Just for my information, so how does this delay a project for a developer to have to go to the next step for PUD, or does it not?
Mayor, essentially they would design their project to the standards they wish, so they would base it off the requirements for the RM3 district and submit that. The application to rezone could be considered concurrent with the plat, so it wouldn't necessarily delay the project.
Okay. I think that for myself and for the public to realize that it's a little bit of a hoop, but it's not a major hoop for them to jump through.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Hellier.
You know, I appreciate the thought and you know, what the future of transit and transportation looks like. And so I would consider something in the future with PUD. I think it's too early to make a decision on without seeing something further. And, you know, not to sound callous, I don't know how many people are going to be commuting by transit over the next 2 years as we figure out new places to live and work.
Right.
So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm at. Is I don't know if this is just the right time, but I'm certainly open to something in the future. So.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Good comments. Other comments, questions? Otherwise, might there be a motion?
Well, I have one more comment.
Oh, yes, please.
And so the reason that I agree with Councilmember Hellier, I would like to be able to wait to see what the future brings, and if the developer really thinks that, you know, obviously they have to sell the product. But I'm not totally sold yet that that's the direction that we need to go. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm the same way. I'm leaning towards the fact that I want to give them the flexibility, but I'm not willing to lower the standard at this point. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. One more time, other comments, questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
Move to approve an ordinance amending titles 4, 10, and 11 of the city code and summary ordinance for publication.
Is there a second? Second. There is a second. Any further discussion? Shar, roll call, please.
Hellier,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Volk,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you all, staff, and everyone that's been involved, and all of the community members that have been involved through the whole comprehensive planning process for the last couple of years, and your engagement. It makes a better plan, and I think we've gotten to an outstanding place. So thanks for your leadership and moving us through this. Thank you very much. We will go to our next item, which is our COVID-19 city operations update. Mr. Miller, are you going to share a few comments with us?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I don't have too much to update since our last meeting, which was just last week at the work session. Just a few updates, though. We have slowly started to open up some facilities based on guidance from the state. Examples would be Lakeville Arenas opened up today to start to user groups who are participating in smaller settings. Both the Arts Center and the Heritage Center have started planning events, and again, with smaller groups, and that would meet the guidelines set forward by the state. We continue to provide all the city services that we have been providing pre-COVID. Much of it's just being done virtually or by phone or by email, but City Hall is still, anybody here at City Hall is still open to be contacted. You call here, we'll answer the phone. You email us, we'll respond. Building permits can still be submitted and picked up and inspected. And public safety, as you heard from Chief Long earlier, is continuing to provide safety, both police and fire, throughout the city. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any comments, questions? Wheeler?
Is the Lakeville DMV open yet?
That's a good question, and I forgot you did ask about that last week. I can follow up with the county and find out. So,
I saw Apple Valley was open.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a question, Michelle?
No, I actually had a comment. Now, I reread the headline a couple of times, so maybe I got something wrong, but there was a letter to the editor regarding the beaches, and I believe the person writing the letter wanted us to close the beaches, but the heading was something like open the beaches, and I guess I just wanted the city to clarify what our policy is at this point for our beaches.
Okay, Mr. Miller, would you like to?
Sure. Mayor and
Sure.
council, the city's policy is that the beaches are open as normal, and we're encouraging everybody to take personal responsibility and manage their space and practice safe social distancing.
And there is some signage that is at the beaches, and I bicycle through Antlers Park pretty much almost once a day these days, and it seems to me that people are being reasonable, and at least to date, in terms of the use of the beaches, and pretty well spread out through the entire park. So I've been pretty pleased about what's going on so far. I don't know, Chief, if you have any experience with the CSOs, or, I'm sorry, Councilmember Volk, I interrupted you.
No, it's all right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. The feedback I've received is it's been very quiet. There has not much been going on.
Okay.
The weather hasn't been that nice, so.
Yeah,
It's going to be nice this week. So.
yeah. Yes, that's true. Did you have another comment?
No, I just wanted to make sure that we made that clarification on the city's point in case it doesn't. I swear I read that headline and it did not match the letter
Okay.
to the, that the person was trying to make the point, so.
Yeah, okay.
I think there might have been like punctuation and missing, but it's, please reconsider your decision on opening the beaches, I think is what the gist of it was.
I wasn't,
I know, but it was
Yeah.
not very clear. It made it sound
Yeah.
like we had closed them.
yeah.
Right.
And they wanted us to open them. So I don't know. I really felt that it was misleading to the public if they didn't know which direction
Yeah,
that the city was moving.
helpful to bring that up because I thought it was confusing too. So, thank you. Any other questions on COVID-19 activities? I do just want to add from my perspective, and maybe from all of our perspectives, please support our local businesses as our community begins to reopen just a little bit. I would just add that encouragement.
I'd actually like to add congratulations to all our 2020 graduates. They are going to have a big week this week, so they're all pretty excited.
Thank you. Is there item 10 and 11, unfinished business and new business? Council, anything for us to consider this evening? Hearing none, we can move to announcements and continue. Any other announcements that people have? Lee?
So I just wanted to help wrap this meeting up by just echoing your comments at the beginning of the meeting, and I want to thank you for doing that. I think some of the conversations I've had with folks throughout this past week is a sense of feeling immobilized by the situations that we're facing right now. And there's fear, there's anxiety, there's anger, frustration, sadness, hopelessness. And what I've experienced in Lakeville is that there are a lot of opportunities to let that out in productive, meaningful ways. I think we've all probably mentioned this in one meeting or another, but the Lakeville Cares website is a really good place to get connected, either if you're needing certain things with mental health or food, or if you want to get connected and volunteer somewhere and serve your time, or not serve your time, but give your time. You know, people, I think, are looking for actionable ways to get involved in their community, and that is one place that I think can really help. But you know, it's not just elected leaders or city staff that can make a difference in our community. People are doing it every day in their religious communities, in their PTOs, in their neighborhoods. And we do have opportunities on a governmental level with the different committees that we appoint every year. So there are myriad ways to get your voice out there and be a part of this community. And I want to encourage and employ everyone to take an inventory of what those opportunities are, because they're all important. And if we're all doing our little parts, this whole world feels like a better place. And I wanted to affirm what you said, Mayor, at the beginning, and hopefully give some people tools to move forward and not just feel stagnant where they're at.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Yes?
Here, so I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit. I would also like to ask the community to take the time to start saying thank you to the, we've said thank you to our police officers and our fire and our nurses, et cetera. But, it was brought to my attention by a Walgreens sign that said, "Heroes work here." And so I think it's really important that we start thanking those people that have had to work through this, that aren't necessarily considered the tier one frontline persons, but yet they are the ones that are still serving us and helping us to keep some sort of normalcy in our lives. But I'd like to challenge all of us to just reach out and give them a, as my granddaughter would do, hug. And let them know that, how thankful we are for what they do and how hard they've worked on through their anxiety of this whole situation and still serve us. So thank you.
Well said. I would also add that this afternoon during my office hours, I had a wonderful conversation with two young ladies, Lakeville graduates from 2016. They're both just finishing up their college careers, and we had a wonderful conversation about these kinds of topics and how we as a community can come together and also be more transparent in terms of and being aware of what everybody's doing. And one of the little ideas that got generated in the conversation was we have a real familiarity and a comfort with the hashtag Lakeville Strong. And maybe there's some way to rebrand that just a little bit in terms of how we support ourselves as the we are twice, I think the statistics show, and I'll have to make sure I'm exactly right on this, but I think we're twice as diverse today culturally as a community than we were like 10 years ago. And something roughly like that. And we're not extremely diverse, but we want to be a community that's together. And so maybe there are some ways that we can begin to be more expressive and show our support of all of us and our neighboring communities and our central city. And in the context of these comments that you folks just made, say thank you. So. Good comments. Thank you very much. Any other announcements? Mr. Miller, do you have any announcements?
No, nothing else, Mayor.
Okay. My final announcement is that our next council meeting is Monday night, June 15th at 6:30 right in this room. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to adjourn, and it has been seconded. And Char, roll call, please.
Lee,
Aye.
Volk,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Hellier.
Aye.
We are adjourned.